Everybody wants to know how their team can get better for that stretch run. So, Adrian, listen, I do this in the group chat. We all do this, fantasy baseball, write articles, whatever. You've been in the room. What's happening? We're about 10 days out now. What is happening within scouting departments, GM office? I mean, I don't even know what these places mean. I'm just saying places. I don't know their actual physical places. Like, what's going on right now, 10 days out?
Oof. So many things, but it's important to note that they've been going on for a little while because the trade deadline, like we could have been making trades for a while, right? But there's something about a deadline that puts a pressure on everybody to actually, if you want to get better, if you want to improve in this calendar year, or if you want to improve in the next year, you're making trades in both directions. So like the teams that are not in it are arguably more active even in them trying to get better for the following season or for future years, as much as the teams that are in it in the hunt. So like there's a position to take no matter what on the baseball operations side of the fence here. And if you're in the contending bucket, then you're locked in on major league rosters. How do I get better to my major league roster to make sure I'm built for the postseason, not only for the postseason, for this push in the second half? Like they call them the dog days of August for a reason, and the dog days of September, to make a good argument for that too. So you got to survive this gamut of the second half, as well as position yourself to win series baseball, wild card series baseball, or longer series, divisional and championship, and obviously World Series. But you have to be built for this 180 plus game structure. And so as a contender, how do you deepen your roster here with sexy splash moves, but also kind of on the margins moves, improvements to the bullpen, stuff like that, that extra bat off the bench, that extra, like that base running replacement? You start to think more in that direction. Whereas if you're on the losing side of this, right, or you're on the selling side of this, you're trying to figure out, you're looking through systems. Now you're spending most of your time looking through the major league roster of other teams, but more likely you're also looking at the minor league system of another team and trying to see what sort of deal you come together on. All the meanwhile having the vehicles to make the deal. So like the vehicle for a selling team to make the deal, I remember Nick Anderson with the Marlins was a really interesting one in a trade deadline room, because you just had an asset that you were willing to trade, and it also carried value at the time, but you weren't in a position to sprint to the postseason. So the reliever allows you to talk to everybody. And so depending on that team's individual need, you can decide, okay, who's got the better farm system to deal with? Do they have somebody in that system that we really like? Do they have a stacking of guys that we really like? And so everybody participates in the trade deadline, whether you're in it or not. And I think that's, I don't want that to be a misconception. But also it's probably the busiest time of the year for a general manager, as well as for somebody who runs a professional scouting department. So we've talked about different scouting departments within a baseball operation structure. You have traditional amateur scouting, who scouts amateur players for the draft domestically in Puerto Rico. Then you have an international amateur group that also scouts. Then you have a professional scouting department that evaluates mostly all professional baseball globally, usually, but also the 29 other teams and their systems and so like when you do line up on a trade, the information that gets pushed forth is the analytics department's take on the player, but also the pro scouting evaluation of that player. So the pro scouting really gets magnified the same way the draft does this for the amateur scouting department, or January 15th signing class for the international. For a pro scouting department, the trade deadline is the Super Bowl of the year, and you can really make or break long-term, short-term, no matter where you are in the win cycle. The pro scouting department is like, you test how good you are on the pro scouting side during the trade deadlines. And then most importantly, it's where I think you move the needle the most as an actual one-on-one general manager. Your ability to make a deal, your ability to like push the right buttons and the right levers, or assess the collective of thoughts being brought to you about your pro scouting department plus your analytics department. Everybody's giving you targets to go after, yet you as the person need to like facilitate and tie up all the components of that deal and get it approved by ownership. But in the meantime, because the general manager can't do all, like one trade, for example, the Jazz Chisholm trade, which I remember being a part of like step by step.
This is Jazz coming in, Zach Gallen going out.
Jazz coming in, Zach Gallen coming out. There was a series of 30 phone calls between myself and the counterpart on the Arizona Diamondbacks. And it like, you're feeling each other out in terms of how we arrived. Like, what do they like? You like Jazz Chisholm. We knew we liked him the whole time. And I thought that vehicle would look like Pablo Lopez at different points in that trade deadline timeline. But And it was very, very cool until the deadline came around. And then all of a sudden, Zach Gallen became a name that really gained helium. And that's what everybody was targeting when they were dealing with you.
Yeah, he just started playing good.
He had just, he
just came up.
There was nothing to say this is like somebody you deal. But also, if you were looking at a roster construction and trying to build a core of position players with cornerstone players that your scouting department believed in, that at that moment in time was Jazz Chisholm, right? And in a lot of ways, he was a lot of those things. But then Zach Gallen goes on to become a Cy Young level ace and arm. And yeah, good. There were good players on both sides of that deal.
Jazz in the All-Star game this past year.
There you go.
Zach having a tough year, kind of going up and down.
My point in spotlighting that is that myself, who was not a general manager, and the other guy on the other side of it, who was also not a general manager, more in like director level positions. I was director of baseball ops at that time. You're dealing with the non-GMs are dealing with each other, building it up, like ideally putting it to the red zone or the 10-yard line for a general manager to, push it across, dealing with the other general manager. But there's a lot of those conversations that are happening right now.
Brandon has a great question in the chat. He goes, is there a lot of scouting or is that over? So like, I know from a fan perspective, I've seen the situation where it's like, you read, okay, well, I know this prospect is getting traded or is our best prospect and we're in the market to buy a major league player. And we had like a Cardinal scout or something in Beloit. I'm just using an example. So, hey, the Cardinals must be interested in X player. Maybe they're going to trade their major league player that we've had their eye on. Just putting pieces together. Or you might say, hey, Marlon Scout was at this event. Whatever it is, you read those things about leading up to the trade deadline in the rumor mill. Scout here, scout there. How much of that actually happens this close to the deadline where you're extra scouting a potential target, whether the minor leagues or in the major leagues?
I think it's happening no matter what. I think it's especially happening if you're targeting a certain profile as a team trying to win and get better, as a team trying to get, so a contending team, quote unquote. I think you're really targeting what you think you need to get better. You're not open scouting that organization. Whereas if you're on the other side of it, you have a little more of an open lens because you have the major league player that's going elsewhere. You have the target going elsewhere. And then you have to like, okay, how can I accrue the most amount of value for my future organization? Whereas on the big league side of things, you're focused in terms of what position is opening. Where's my roster soft? Where can I, because that's the only way you can organize your efforts. Like, okay, I'm going to hunt a back end reliever. I'm going to hunt a left-handed bat that I can complement X, Y, or Z on our roster. Or like, we definitely need another seventh inning guys get really popular during this part of the year. Closers get a lot of the hype, but those relievers that move in the leverage innings that are not the closer roles, those guys can make a big difference in this. Like, Yimi Garcia to me doesn't get enough love. I watched him do this in 2020 where he's not your closer, but he's your relief ace in whatever tough pocket. And that's a really valuable role throughout these next 2 months, as well as well into the postseason. So those guys get really valuable. Your right-handed hitting lefty matchup, your power matchups, those guys can really move the needle a lot, but they're not really thought of over the course of the 162. I don't know if a name, Steven Pierce. Do you remember Steve Pierce with the Red Sox?
Yep.
So Steve Pierce had this burst of production during the World Series run as the lefty killer, because now you're playing matchup baseball a lot more, and you're really matching up your lefties versus your righties and optimal lineup construction and rosters and things like that. And there are guys who can really make a living in the postseason, and you can target them with that kind of precision. I need that bat in my lineup, right-handed, left-handed. Catching gets popular now. Big league catching is like, you just got to get through the whole season. So there's so many ways to answer the question of how you need to prepare for a trade deadline, but it feels climactic on the day of the deadline. But the work going on right now between pro scouting departments, GMs talking to other GMs is wild, but we haven't seen the wildness of it. The wildness happens in the last 6 hours. Like, there's something about a deadline that feels like, okay, I'm either doing everything I can as a general manager to get my roster better, or I'm not. And you can always feel like there's a move that you can make, a back end of your 40 with their back end of 40, something that's a better matchup. Like, there's always a move to be made, and you can always be moving a needle. That's why I say, you as a general manager, I'm not saying you can't show up for the rest of it, but if all you did was helicopter in and be a really good deadline specialist or trade deadline mover, you can move the needle big time. And some guys are more talented in the, let's say, the analytically driven side of things. But like there's a deal-making art to this that you have to be, you can't just analytically run through a list talking to another general manager or another baseball operations high-level executive. Like there's a human component to like this deal-making thing that you have to do. And some teams lean in a more deal-making capacity. We've talked about Tampa. They're always in the rhythm of making deals on either side of this. So they're very active in trades. But then there are other teams that don't trade as often. And you see the trades happen in the off season, but not necessarily at the deadline.
Like what team would you say?
The White Sox never felt really active in conversation to me. Like you're not like having a frequent dialogue on like who we like from your side and who you like from our side. During my time there, I remember the Diamondbacks just felt like I was constantly talking to them about their players, them about our players, their big league players, and usually our system players. I remember we really loved Ketel Marte, and so it was like every angle to try to see like if that would be probable. And to their credit, they always held firm on Ketel Marte. It was just one of my favorite players. Ketel and Starling Marte. I remember that I had those as targets in the same year. But there are other teams like that and all along the scale. But you remember the ones that are most active. Seattle's very active. The Dodgers, the Padres are very, very active. Like a lot of things move around this time, and I think that the deadline just allows for you to really dramatically like improve your team. I think sometimes people think of it as only draft rooms. That's where you get players, but the trade deadline is, as viable as any. And it really comes down to a deadline. Jesús Sanchez's deal was made with 20 minutes left on the trade deadline with the Tampa Bay Rays.
I was going to ask you, that was exactly what I was going to ask you about. So you've been involved in a lot of deals going back a ways, but I want to focus on the Marlins. You had more responsibility, obviously trades that I remember watching in real time as a fan of the Marlins. So the Jesús Sánchez trade, Nick Anderson comes out of nowhere. And you picked him up for what? I mean, he was like a nothing pickup.
He was one of those deals that happened because I remember he was traded for Brian Shales. He was a prospect with the Marlins, but he was on the edge of their 40-man. It's like, hey, we have 40 spots. You're probably number 41, 42, or 43. And so instead of exposing you to waivers, you make a trade on a team that might like him. And that's like another mini trade deadline, the day you set your 40-man roster, because there's going to be guys based on your protection year, and it's complicated with options. It's like layered, but there's a mini trade deadline that happens in the offseason when you're setting your roster. That Nick Anderson was in that category, just available enough, and with time running out that you have to deal it. And then he goes off and has a little run, but that's just them in the business of being active and getting out ahead of deals instead of exposing a guy like Nick Anderson to waivers where he would have been claimed as well, which is another way to get players. But if you can always get out in front of a waiver claim with a trade.
And when you get the player, he does great. He's unhittable, really. I mean, he was an unbelievable run he
had a really good run.
And then Trevor Richards, who I think he's still hanging around, shockingly. I thought I saw his name in some blotter.
I did as well. And with a changeup like that, you're always going to have a role or a space in the game. And I remember that trade.
He's throwing.
He was popular in that sense too.
What an unusual player, just banging that changeup all time, independent league, right?
But Ryan Stanek came out of that deal too. Who's gone on to be a super effective reliever. Period. So the intake on the assessment of the player was wrong, but sometimes trade deadlines are tricky. Like guys going into this new place in the middle of a season, midstream, you don't know, like your philosophy can go into a completely opposing way of being utilized and things like that. And there's all sorts of factors on the other end of the trade that we can get into also.
Yeah, sore subject for Marlins fans, that Stanek part of the deal. But I remember when it happened, we knew Anderson had value because we'd watched him. We knew Richards had his unique style. But I remember we got Jesús Sánchez. I mean, the fans. You see it on the Craig Mish or whoever. You say Jesús Sánchez. Well, I didn't know he was available. This is a prospect that's had some juice from even people that weren't fans of the Rays had heard of Jesús Sánchez. He was pretty close to the majors, all that stuff. So I remember when we got him, the thought was, well, the Rays know what they're doing. They're pretty good at trades. Like, do they know something about this player that we don't know? That was at least my reaction. A lot of Marlins fans' reactions, because on paper, we're like, you don't usually get for these guys that we just barely picked up for nothing to get a prized position player prospect. I think in retrospect, even without the Drew Stanek component, I think the Marlins won the trade. So it's not like you got tricked on anything. Jesús Sánchez is not an all-star, but he's played a lot of games. He has value. He's probably going to get traded now in this deadline. Very valuable
major league player.
Right. So is there any of that where a prospect that maybe you don't think is available is getting brought up and you kind of put it on mute or had the conversation like, hey, why is this guy available? Is there something we don't know? What's that like when a player that you don't think is available comes available?
The first thing that stands out is like you won't know until you ask for it specifically. And so here's where things you do during the JT Realmuto discussions, because Tampa was one of the teams that every good team was in on Realmuto, and only a few teams made sense. We were in it, later with the Yankees, the Phillies, when it closed in, but you canvass a lot of different clubs that also put out a feeler call. But in that process, dealing with Tampa on JT Realmuto, targeting who we would like in their system if we were to make a deal with Tampa, Jesús Sánchez was in that grouping. So swings around in a different context, non-JT Realmuto. We don't make that trade. And now you're dealing with the Rays again, and you go back to your canvassing of their system, and you're like, hey, we've always really liked Jesús Sánchez. And in that situation, I remember specifically, and this is where Mike Hill, to me, gets so much credit and love. Like, Mike Hill was a really talented deadline general manager, but just facilitator. He knew how to get a deal done, and he knew how to feel out a deal. And I thought he was really talented there. And with I think 20 minutes left to the deadline, we had just traded for, it was Jazz Chisholm, Lewin Diaz. It had a pretty active trade deadline. There are other deals in there as well. But remember nudging Gary actually. And I was like, hey, Tampa really seems to like Nick Anderson. We had it to, are we going to move this or not? Because we could have held him and he would have been valuable again in the future.
You had control for a while.
It wasn't have to deal him. It's more like, what can we get with this really valuable asset that it was kind of like found money, right? And in that scenario, in that amount of time, the opportunity is created for Mike Hill to pick up the phone and call Chaim Bloom at the time. And you don't know what a team has going on their end. Jesús Sánchez could have been a really talented player, but the sixth guy in their outfield depth, and they're on a run. They were getting Nick Anderson, so they wanted him for the short term. So you won't know if you don't ask, and that's where Tampa being involved in all these discussions. I think they're access to a lot of players. They also trade away a lot of value. I don't know. Less trades happen in this guy won and this guy lost. It's more like value was exchanged. One value ends up being higher or not, but Tampa knows you have to give to get. And I think that's what makes them active deal makers. And so the Rays one stands out with Jesús Sánchez because it was enough amount of time on the clock up against a guy who wants to win on the other side, or a team who wants to win. And maybe we don't have the highest projections of this guy in Jesús Sánchez. I think he's going to be a good player, but you guys seem to really like him. Let's see where this makes the most sense. And Nick Anderson was, and I don't remember how he ended up doing on that run, but I'm pretty sure he was really good in their progression.
He got hurt at some point in that process. I think back, I'm obviously looking at them through a Marlins lens because I remember these deadlines and just watching them. The trade, which you were not a part of, where you see Stowers and Norby coming to Miami, Trevor Rogers going to Baltimore, getting a little more even over time, at least on the Rogers part, but Stowers going to a different stratosphere. Do you, in your role when you're a director or whoever's involved in pro scouting, have a sense of not only this is the need of this team, but hey, this team has a crunch here. This team has too many position players. This is what this team has to be thinking, kind of like almost putting yourself in the position of these teams and seeing where they are. I don't want to say vulnerable, but hey, they just have too many guys here and they have a problem that they need to solve some way, potentially by acquiring something else that they might need. Is that part of the process, just knowing where those teams are at themselves and putting yourself in their place? For sure. And this is where the pro scouting department really makes its bones if you're good at it. If you're constantly talking to the other teams. I was one of those people on the receiving end and giving end of these calls. So I know that I have to have 3 bullet points of what I'm looking to accomplish in the deadline. It's like, hey, every team should talk to every team. And in your 30 conversations or 29, you have to have your own thing prepared. Now, that's biased against what you think about your team, but it's a tidbit that when another team calls, you have, hey, we're looking for, prospect upside, best player available. I think we're willing to talk about our relievers. We're willing to talk about our core of outfield left-handed bat. So even if you don't specify the name, you tell them the general position that you're willing to deal from. We're willing to expose our upper end starting pitching in deals to make this happen or to access this level of player. So the canvassing on the front end allows you to have more pointed action items
as we get closer to the deadline. And you could do that weeks out. Problem is the pro scouting department has to do that for every potential outcome. So you just have to canvas to then maybe make 1-2 deals, right? So you do a lot of work that doesn't really get appreciated, but you fuel the front office and the general manager with the information to make the decisions. And if you could get out ahead of a few the days leading up to the deadline, that to me is optimal scenario. The problem with that is people don't move to their highest like bend point until the deadline. So the deals that get made out in front are a need driven. If somebody goes down and you know the deadline's a week away, but you just had an injury happen now, you may be more willing to make that deal now to not lose these next 4, 5, 6 games. So I don't know. I love the trade deadline. Favorite time of the year, but you can access things you might not otherwise have a chance at.